Welcome to This Explainer. Let's dive right into an absolute mind-bending mystery of our deep past. I mean, think about it for a second. How exactly did our ancient ancestors manage to survive, coordinate massive hunts, raise their kids, and actually thrive for millions of years without ever speaking a single word? It is just an incredible story of evolution, and we're going to break the whole thing down today.
You know, you meet a total stranger and within seconds it's just, "Hi, how are you? Where are you from? Let's do something tomorrow." We completely take this instant transfer of complex ideas for granted, right? We've been doing it our whole lives. Words just tumble out of your mouth, they land in someone else's ears, and miraculously, these incredibly complex ideas transfer from one brain to another without a single physical object ever passing between you. But we really need to look at the staggering reality of our deep history.
Because for 99% of the existence of our genus, that just didn't happen. 99%. There were no words, no grammar, literally no abstract sentences at all. There is absolutely zero way to say, "Hey, the river is dangerous," or "I'm really angry at you," or "Let's hunt the deer tomorrow." For nearly 2 million years, our ancestors lived, fought off predators, and built tools, with absolutely nothing resembling modern speech.
So, let's look at Section 1, 2 million silent years, the timeline of human silence.
Let's trace our direct evolutionary line. The genus Homo emerges way back, roughly 2.5 million years ago. But modern, fully syntactic human language, you know, the kind with all the complex grammar I'm using to explain this to you right now, that probably didn't show up until somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago. Writing wasn't even invented until about 5,000 years ago. That means for nearly 2 million years, our ancestors walked upright, they fashioned stone tools, mastered fire, literally migrated across entire continents and cared for their wounded, and they did the whole shebang entirely without sentences. How in the world did they pull that off?
Which brings us to Section 2, sound, gesture, and sign, the first forms of communication.
Look, pretty much every primate alive today communicates with vocal calls. Vervet monkeys, for instance, they have these hardwired, fixed alarm calls for specific predators, like a certain grunt for an eagle and a totally different one for a snake. Our early ancestors probably used a richer, beefed-up version of these fixed alarm calls to warn of specific dangers. But that is vastly different from modern human language, which uses grammar to create, well, infinite abstractions. You can assemble infinite sentences out of finite words. A primate's grunt is just an alarm. It's not a conversation. It's just a fixed signal that's hardwired right into the brain.
But way before our throats could shape complex vowel sounds, our hands could point and mimic. Get this, it's fascinating. Back in 1980, the Nicaraguan government brought together deaf children into a single school for the very first time. Without any teachers guiding them, these kids spontaneously invented an entirely new, grammatically complex sign language literally from scratch, all within a single generation. Linguists were actually watching it happen in real time. And what this proves is that the human brain is deeply hardwired for communication. It strongly suggests that highly expressive, spontaneous gesturing was likely our original, silent language as we sat around those ancient campfires.
All right, moving on to Section 3, the anatomy of speech, evolving to talk.
Now, to actually speak out loud, the physical body itself had to undergo a massive anatomical evolution. You needed descended larynx, a super flexible tongue, and this tiny horseshoe-shaped thing called a hyoid bone that acts as an anchor for the tongue muscles. Well, in 1989, archaeologists in Kibara Cave over in Israel made an absolutely stunning discovery. They found a 60,000-year-old Neanderthal skeleton that had a completely modern-shaped hyoid bone. Later, biomechanical tests proved it functioned just like ours does today. So this revealed that Neanderthals actually had the anatomical equipment to produce a really wide range of sounds. They basically had the hardware. But does that mean they were talking like us?
Well, actually probably not. Let me explain why. Back in 2001, scientists identified a gene called FOXP2, which is heavily involved in speech. The press, of course, went crazy and dubbed it the language gene. But the truth is always a bit more complicated. Turns out, humans and Neanderthals actually share the exact same two key FOXP2 mutations that distinguish us from chimpanzees. So, if Neanderthals had the gene too, it proves that true language required a lot more than just the physical hardware, or a single gene. It required subtle new software, a totally new wiring in the brain, to let us actually assemble those infinite sentences.
Let's jump into Section 4, the power of silence, action without words.
So how do you actually run a functioning society without this new brain software of spoken language? Well, deep, silent coordination is actually insanely efficient. Anthropologists look at the Hadza hunter-gatherers of Tanzania for clues. These folks can coordinate a highly complex hunt for hours using nothing but hand signals and a few brief whistles. I mean, talking would just scare the prey away anyway. Or just think about modern military units on stealth missions, surgical teams in a tense operating room, or even elite athletes anticipating a play on the field. When everyone intimately knows the goal, words become entirely optional. Our ancestors shared a mutual understanding so incredibly deep that explicit conversation just wasn't necessary most of the time. You just knew what to do.
Which leads us to Section 5, the birth of symbols, crossing the abstract threshold.
Then humanity crossed this incredible symbolic threshold, and it changed our trajectory forever. Let's trace these steps. Down in Blombos Cave in South Africa, starting around 100,000 years ago, someone started mixing red ochre paint in abalone shells. Flash forward to 75,000 years ago, and they're wearing pierced shell beads as ornaments. And that leads directly up to 73,000 years ago to the oldest known human drawing, a deliberate cross-hatched pattern in red ochre. So what does this all mean? Well, drawing is symbolic communication. It carries a meaning far beyond just the physical lines on a rock. This proves, for the first time, our ancestors were thinking and communicating completely abstractly.
And once that threshold was crossed, the idea just spread like wildfire. Symbolic behavior exploded globally. We're talking painting these breathtaking, dynamic bison on the walls of caves in France and Spain. We're talking carving intricate female figurines out of mammoth ivory in Germany, and even crafting musical flutes from vulture bone. Just think about the complexity of these activities for a second. You cannot teach a child how to carve a vulture bone flute just by grunting at them. You can't organize a complex ritual burial just by pointing. Somewhere in those tens of thousands of years, those ancient murmurs and gestures finally crystallized into actual complex words.
Section 6. The recent written word. Language outside the throat.
The final piece of this evolutionary puzzle brings us shockingly close to our modern era. Just 5,000 years ago, which is basically yesterday in evolutionary time, by the way, the Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia invented writing. Around 3200 BC, they started pressing these little wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets to record trades, taxes, and eventually their stories. This is absolutely crucial, because for the very first time in human history, language existed outside of a human throat. A sentence could be stored, copied, and read centuries later by someone who had never even met the original speaker. Every law, poem, and text message we have today descends from this very moment. Now, to put that timeline into perspective, 2 million years of our ancestors surviving in total, absolute silence. 100,000 years ago, symbolic thought finally explodes onto the scene. And then a mere 5,000 years ago, the written word is invented. The crucial point here is that the unbroken chain from a Sumerian merchant's clay tablet straight to the rapid-fire text messages you read on your smartphone screen today, it's incredibly short. It's just a tiny blip compared to the millions of years our species survived, loved, hunted, and built a foundation in complete silence.
We've inherited their incredible gift of language, but in a way, we've lost their silence. For hundreds of thousands of years, they sat around fires and communicated not in sentences, but in presence. They watched a hand point and understood an entire plan. So, as we furiously send our tests and fill literally every single moment of our days with endless conversations and noise, we really have to ask ourselves, in gaining all these words, did we lose a deeper form of unspoken connection? They survived and thrived without talking, so did they actually understand each other better than we do today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.